Coach's Corner number 6. My name is Rick Cumberland, and I'm pleased to be sharing this time with you today in our leadership development theme of communication. Hopefully our time together will help you to gain some pointers on communicating one-to-one. One-to-one is really the most frequent type of communication that we experience in our day-to-day operations. And we'd like to discuss a couple of different avenues of communicating one-to-one and improving that, making more effective meetings for us. First, I think, is to understand that there are different types of communicating one-to-one. We're going to concentrate mostly today on formal communication, which would be, in a normal course of business, items like performance reviews or periodic follow-ups, department-specific reviews, reports, or a formal goal follow-up session. Those would all be good examples of formal communication. The other type would be informal communication, which would be just responding to an issue or a question, or scheduling a meeting, or relaying typical information that happens day to day in the workplace. We find that typically in these one-to-one meetings, the uses are beneficial in, first of all, checking for performance or progress on specific goals or tasks, and secondly, also determining if there's further coaching or counseling that might be needed that comes from these one-to-one meetings that we have. Let's talk first about preparing for the meeting, because that's critical to having an effective meeting. The first thing would be determining the purpose, and even as you send out your announcement regarding the meeting that you're requesting, it's very typical that the person receiving it is going to want to ask, why are we meeting? So first of all, reviewing that particular purpose of the meeting is the first order of business in preparing. And let's say for today's discussion, the purpose of our meeting is going to be to review progress on the latest quarterly personal goals that you've set. The second thing would be, prior to the meeting and preparing for it, listing the objectives. At least for your own use. This doesn't necessarily need to be distributed, but it would actually talk about in your list what are the things you expect to accomplish in this meeting. So in this particular meeting, I might say that first we want to review the specific goals that were set. And secondly, an objective may be to clarify the timelines. Thirdly, maybe progress with the completion of the goals to see what progress is being made. We also may want to talk about an explanation of any barrier to the accomplishment of those goals, and we certainly want to cover the objective of acknowledging the goals that have already been completed. And then lastly, I think agreeing on what kind of follow-up and what tasks are necessary to make sure that we're completing these goals as we would close out the meeting. So those would be typical objectives for this type of a meeting. The last item in preparation for the meeting would be perhaps distributing written information regarding the upcoming meeting. There might be an agenda, or there might be some review information that we want to take a look at before the meeting, or there might be some reports that are critical to the meeting. So once we've prepared for the meeting, the next order of business would be conducting the meeting. And I think it's critical that as we consider the proper use of people's time, that we get to the point very quickly in the meeting. And that doesn't mean that you can't have a brief chat about common interests. You may be reviewing these goals with a department manager or someone that reports directly to you, and perhaps you have children that are in soccer and you're preparing for a final game, or perhaps you have children that are getting ready for their first prom. And certainly you want to be able to build that rapport and talk about those things. But I think it's important then that once that's established that we get quickly to the point of the meeting. Sticking to the agenda is also very important in conducting the meeting, making sure we get back on track and not get too far aside from the agenda for the meeting. And also summarizing at the end, making sure that we've announced to the person what the purpose of the meeting is, we've set our objectives, we've discussed the content of the meeting, and then at the end we're summarizing it. Helps really to etch in all of those critical points to a successful meeting. And then lastly, as we've already talked about in our preparation stage, let's make sure we spend time agreeing on the next steps and responsibilities. It's important to know at the end of the meeting who's expected to do what and when it needs to be completed. So that would deal with conducting the meeting so that we can have an effective meeting. The next item is what we would call making the meeting successful. And it again, many meetings that we have, We may have prepared very nicely. We may conduct the meeting in great fashion, but there may be a lacking of making the meeting successful in certain areas. One of the first areas I think that can sort of set a meeting off to the wrong tone is not being able to listen appropriately. And I think that's probably the most critical thing in a meeting, is listening intently and giving undivided attention when the person that you're meeting with is responding and giving explanation, and acknowledge what they're saying to make sure you're staying on track. So listening is critical. The next thing is being courteous, and I think this is important to all of us who are engaged in improving our leadership style. And that is remembering everybody who comes to a meeting, particularly to a meeting where you may be reporting to someone that's higher up in the organization, there's a certain feeling of insecurity or apprehension perhaps in that person coming to the meeting. So I think it's critical that we're courteous to those people who attend our meetings. After all, I think we accomplish a whole lot more by being courteous and understanding than we do by being curt and direct and sort of dictatorial in our style. So being courteous, I think, is critical to having an effective meeting as well. And the last thing I would emphasize is aiming for a buy-in discussion. It's not only important to be organized and to conduct the meeting and to be listening as well as to being courteous, but especially toward the end of the meeting, asking for buy-in discussion from the team member. Perhaps saying, what do you think of this particular direction or of this particular goal? And especially if we've realigned something, we want to make sure that they're tracking on that realignment and engaged in that. So aiming for the buy-in decision or discussion is very important as well. As we said earlier, during one-to-one meetings, there are often additional opportunities that extend beyond the stated agenda, such as looking for an opportunity for further coaching with that particular individual or individuals. This all gets back to what we talked about earlier, and that is listening. Listening to the participants and making sure that they're understanding what our goals are in that particular session may lead us to an opportunity to coach them further and to improve that understanding. That also comes from looking for alignment with the goals that we're setting. If we're able to get people to track and to be aligned with those goals, it certainly will produce a more effective outcome. The next item would be providing encouragement or direction. Again, it's important to be well organized in a meeting and to be effective in our communication, but we want to make sure that periodically we're encouraging an individual who is accomplishing the goals and who is understanding the direction and making sure that they understand that they're going in the right direction, and that comes from encouragement. The last item in looking for coaching opportunities might come in the form of encouraging the participants to maintain a high standard. For instance, we may have an individual who is understanding a goal and who is aligned, but perhaps their commitment to the time element of it isn't as sharp as we want, or the degree of perfection in that particular goal may not be as high as we would like it. That might present an opportunity for further coaching to encourage that individual to improve that standard and to increase it. The next item goes along with coaching and is more in-depth than coaching, and that is looking for an opportunity for perhaps counseling someone. If we're paying attention to attitudes, body language, and some of the communication methodology that we've studied earlier on in our Coaches Corners, we're knowing that, we're recognizing that people may have a negative attitude, and that may indicate a need for not only coaching, but also further counseling individuals, and that may be an area that you're not very comfortable with or skilled at doing. So one of the things we would need to do as we discover that is determine if there is need beyond coaching, and then also looking for the appropriate resources to provide that assistance. We'd also caution too that in looking for an opportunity for counseling, one of the areas that is really important is being sympathetic. An individual may be going through difficulties in a relationship with someone at work or someone at home, and that's impacting the attitude of their response in your particular meeting. And so we want to be sympathetic to what they're going through and make sure that we're securing the appropriate resource. Again, many of us are skilled at counseling, or at coaching, excuse me, but we're not quite as skilled at counseling, and we may need some professional help and resource in that situation. So I hope these points have been helpful to you as we look at communicating better, and particularly in those one-on-one meetings that you're going to have maybe even this week. Thank you very much. Good luck.